I hate the Zestimate. Those are words that I myself am guilty of having said over the last 3, 4, 5 years. As agents, we all know that the Zestimate is simply that, an estimate, and it can often be wildly, wildly off base. But rather than considering it a foe, why don't we turn it into a friend? Recently, I was down in Valle de Guadalupe with my partners at eXp. We're some of the most productive agents in the entire country. And there was a particular individual who got up, and he is a listing machine, lists himself over 100 homes per year. And he shared with us a very special, powerful piece of dialogue that I want to share with all of you today. Before we go there, though, what I want all of us to consider before I give you this dialogue is why the Zestimate is our enemy. The Zestimate is our enemy for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Zestimate is considered an enemy because it gives sellers a wildly off-base ambition, usually it's our enemy when it's a higher Zestimate. So on a $1.5 million home, the Zestimate says it's worth 1.6. It's our enemy because it gives them expectations that are off base. Fine. There are ways to combat that. Another reason why the Zestimate is our enemy is because we don't get in front of it. We are reactive as opposed to proactive. And that's essentially what Jason does. Jason, shout outs to you, man. This is some gangster ass dialogue to use with your clients. And it all happens at the beginning. And this is what I tell all of my team members, by the way. It's like, nothing is unsolvable if you bring it up at the beginning. There are no issues. There is no issue too big for preparing the client in advance. And that's essentially what you're doing here. It's very simple. When you call the seller to confirm the appointment, you should be asking them a couple of questions. Like, some people tend to ask, like, what's your payoff, right? Like, how much do you owe the bank? And in a perfect world, what kind of timeline had you given yourself to make the move to XYZ location? The last question that you ask goes a little something like this. And it requires that you do a little bit of research. So you have to go onto Zillow, you have to type in their address, and you see, hey, 123 Main Street is listed, or is the Zestimate is at 1.4 million. Hey, Mr. Seller, before I let you go, I just noticed I was on Zillow today, and I noticed the Zestimate was about 1.4 million. How do you feel about that? This is powerful for so many reasons. Number one, it's an indirect way of extracting their price from them. If you go into a listing appointment not knowing the seller's price, you're fucked. Period. So it allows you to draw out the price without being the bad guy. Zillow's the bad guy. You just said, hey, Zillow has your house at this price. You're not saying, I think your home is worth this price. Big difference. So you're able to draw out the price. Number one, you're able to also get out a lot of price objections using this dialogue. And so when you go into the listing appointment, you're already infinitely more prepared. Also, you don't have to deal with that silly Zillow objection that you get every single listing appointment that you go on, because we all know that I would say 90% of the sellers that I go to, 90% of the sellers that I have a listing appointment with end up asking me directly or indirectly about the Zestimate and or the Redfin estimate. And by the way, I'd be prepared for both. I wouldn't just do one. Like, I think Jason's idea is phenomenal, But I put this into action myself on the listing appointments that I've had between then and now, and I gotta say, it's worked like a charm. Either, and this happened to me, where the seller said, well, that sounds fantastic. This estimate sounds fantastic. And to be honest with you, after running the comps, I realized, wow, this is actually a very conservative number, and I think that we could actually get way more for it. And so the listing appointment just went so easily, because the sellers were like, wow, that's like way more than I thought that we were going to get. And the conversation was different. I was able to have a different conversation with them because I knew in advance all of the objections that I was going to get, in this case, not many. But imagine the inverse scenario where I hadn't been prepared and I went into that conversation and I didn't know what their price was. I may have not even gotten the listing. Because if you don't know how to present a price that's more than what the sellers want, they start to think in their head, wow, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So you have to know how to present it. And then another example is where the exact opposite, where the Zestimate was actually under what the seller thought it was worth. And I was able, through comparables, to figure out that the seller was right and the Zestimate was off, under. But anyway, the Zestimate's over, under, right on the mark, it doesn't really matter. It just matters that you know that information up front, so you understand the seller psychology and you know how to frame the appointment in advance. Because if you understand how to frame the appointment using the seller's price, it's a cakewalk from there. This is Danny Gould, everyone. Selling Silicon Valley. Stay legendary, everyone.